Hello everyone, this is Grandmaster Ankit Rajpara here. I welcome all of you to the special collaboration between Chess Neurons and ChessBase India. For this episode of Strategic Mastery series, I have taken all the positions from the topic of prophylaxis. In simple words, prophylaxis means paying careful attention to your opponent's ideas. So let's get started with the first position. So here, white is Hikaru Nakamura and black is Nihal Sarin. This is from one of their online games. Now, if you want to attempt this position, please pause the video here and resume once you are ready with the move. So, let's try to understand this position a bit further. As we can notice, white's up a pawn, so that's a good thing. And what are certain things that we should be careful of in an endgame? So we want to activate our king. Yeah, we want to try to create a pass pawn. It's also there. But the same thing applies for our opponent as well. So opponent would want to activate the king. Opponent would want to create a pass pawn. So in this position, can you identify what does Nihal want to do? So Nihal wants to play king b5. So he's down a pawn, but he wants to activate his king so that maybe he can go king a4, king a3. Maybe he can go king c4, king c3. By being on b5 itself, there is some pressure on the b4 pawn. So if that king gets active, then despite having an extra pawn, it will be a bit difficult for Nakamura to make progress. So it's really important that even if you are up a pawn in the endgame, you should not relax and you should be extremely careful about such ideas of the opponent. So Nakamura, of course, stopped the idea of Nihal by playing a4. So he's like, I'm not going to allow that king to get active. And then, so the game continued with a6. Nakamura played f3. He's not in any rush. Bishop g1 was played by Nihal. And then Nakamura brought his king to d2. So he's planning to now improve his king's position, and slowly he can, after bringing the king here, he can in some positions bring one of the knights here, or he can play b5 and then create a pass pawn. Depending on what Nihal does, so Nakamura will respond. So but it's clear that there is no way he was going to allow Nihal's king to get active. Otherwise, it would be a bit too much activity for him. So a4 was a very nice move to stop Nihal's king activity, and then the extra pawn of Nakamura is enough for him to slowly improve the position and then win the game. So even if it is endgame, even if less pieces are there, please be alert and be cautious about your opponent's ideas. Now let's go for the next position. So this is black to play here. If you want to attempt this position, please pause the video here and resume once you are ready. So if you look at this position in a bit more detail, material is equal, but white's bishop, so it's bishop versus knight, rest of the pieces are, so in terms of piece imbalance, it's, white has the bishop, black has the knight. So because of these three pawns here, because of this pawn on f4, and because of the nature of the position being closed, it's clear that this bishop is restricted, and because of these important pawns being on dark squares, the light squares of white are also weaker. Why so? Because if the pawn is on dark square, then it would only control the dark squares. So light squares have gotten weaker because of that as well. Now, if we try to understand what our opponent is trying to do, then it's clear that there is a move that can help white in improving the position, that is c4. So what does c4 do? It gets one of the pawns on light squares, so that's a good thing. And another thing, it helps them in preparing to play d5, because that would actually help them in activating this bishop. So if the pawns get on c4, d5, that bishop will get active, and the light square weaknesses that are there as well, so would get reduced, because white would have been successful in bringing two pawns in on the light squares. So and one of them being the central pawn. So there is no way we are going to allow that. And once we notice it, then the move becomes easy. That is to play knight b6, stopping that c4 idea, stopping that potential d5 idea as well. And then If white is like, I want to play a bit more aggressively with g4, no problem at all. We can bring the knight on c4 with a tempo, and then we can play e3. So the pass pawn gets pushed. Some lines there can be ideas like this, and some lines there can be ideas like this as well. And this is not one of the most comfortable positions for white to be in. White can try to play something like bishop c1 and stay solid, but still, look at a knight on c4. And now the position was already a bit passive for white, and especially because the c4 d5 idea has been stopped, it has become even more passive. Getting activity will become very difficult. Rook a2, we can centralize the queen. You can play b5, strengthening this knight, and depending on what white does. So let's say something like this, then what we can try to do is we can try to create some of our own activity on the queen side. So some of the plan could be to put pressure here. Knight b6, trying to exchange the queens to put pressure on this backward pawn. The queen could move, no problem. We can try to move the queen. We can try to centralize the knight to put pressure on the king side and on the queen side as well. So definitely, see, stopping c4 helped us so much in not just keeping white's activity on the queen side in check, but also putting up pieces in such a manner that depending on what white does, we can increase the pressure on the king side or the queen side later on. So let's go for the next position. So this is black to play here, and please pause the video here if you want to attempt this position, and you can resume it once you are ready with the move. So as it can be clearly seen, white has this idea of knight takes a5, free pawn. So we are not going to give it. So let's just play a4 and get it done with. What a great move. We are defending the pawn by pushing it, attacking the knight, doing it with a tempo. So good. So, it's very important that once we notice the threat of the opponent, we should, and this is the mistake that we do a lot more frequently. That is, once we notice an idea of the opponent, let's say this is an obvious idea, the first move that comes into our mind that stops that idea, we play that move actually. It's a mistake. Please don't do that. Please be disciplined and ask yourself, what are certain ideas that my opponent could do after I make this move? And you should also make a list of candidate moves. So there could be more than one way to stop your opponent's idea. So for example, if you look at this one, so one is a4, that's clear. Another is bishop d8. But then some of you would be like, why make the bishop passive? Why not a4? But once again, we should look a bit more in depth. We should not just, okay, the knight takes a5 has been dealt with, it's so good. No, see, opponent can still bring the knight to a5. So what? What is the knight doing there? Knight is not doing much there, but the knight will do something. So the rook will have to go back, and then the knight will get on the outpost square on c6. Do we really want that knight to be on such a strong outpost square? Because then the queen side activity that black wants to create, it will be restricted. In fact, white will be putting some pressure on black's queen side. So please remember that whenever you see your opponent's idea, don't just quickly make the move, the first move that comes into your mind. So because a4 seems like a natural move, but if you do that, you're allowing that knight to get on the outpost square. So bishop d8 looks a bit passive, but still, since we are covering the a5, we are not just defending the a5 pawn, we are covering the a5 square. So that's why knight a5 is not a possibility, and that gives us more chances. So let's say after that, opponent can actually be like, I'll play rook d3. We are not in a rush. We can play king d7 and improve the position. King c1, then just a4. Now we can play a4 because there is no knight a5. We can exchange this, and then there are ideas of bishop f6. e4 is a threat. Not one of the most fun positions for white to play. Let's say after bishop d8, opponent is like, I don't want the knight. I want to play knight d2. No problem at all. We can play in this position. Knight takes d2, rook takes d2, and then bishop g5. By the way, we already had a protected central pass pawn. The rook was active. So we are ready to exchange the bishop. If the bishops get exchanged, we will get the semi-open file to put pressure on this pawn. But white can just maintain the tension, no problem at all. We have some plans of improving the king's position. There can be at times ideas of h5 as well. There can be some ideas of this as well. This. it's clear that because of our active pieces and with the potential for activity on the king side and on the queen side, combined with this pass pawn, so yeah, black's doing clearly better. So, but all of it would not have been possible had we allowed the knight to get on the outpost square by playing a4. So, please be careful. Now, let's go for the next position. So, this is white to play here. Now, looks like such a great position for white because two pawns in the center, two knights here, the bishop is also here. So good. Yeah. But it's important that when we have these two pawns in the center, when we have these active pieces, we want to keep them like that. We want to maintain it. And at times, that can become a bit of a tricky task. So please remember that whenever you have such advantages, maybe you might have strong center, maybe you can have double bishop advantage, maybe you can have an open file, maybe you can have an outpost square. So such things are there. So not so it's important to have them, but it's also more important to maintain them. So by the way, if you want to attempt this position, please pause the video here and resume once you are ready with the move. So in this position, if you notice it in a bit more depth, then you will see that opponent has this plan of playing bishop g4. And then this d4 pawn will get under a bit of a pressure. Now then some of you would be like, so what? I'll play bishop e3. I'll just defend it. I'm not worried about it. See, then the rook is not defending this pawn. You'll be like, wait, what? The knight is still defending the pawn. But that can create some issues because that can actually give some opportunities like knight takes e4, knight takes e4, d5 type of ideas. So, and even if we like bishop e3, bishop g4, sometimes if this happens, if the queen captures, then this pawn might fall. So, that doesn't, that still doesn't actually deal with opponents' clear idea. So we should be careful. We just don't want the central pawn. We want to maintain them, and for that to happen, it's important to identify that opponent can try to destabilize our center with ideas like bishop g4. So we are not in a rush in this position. Let's play. Nice move. h3. Dealing with this idea of the opponent. And yeah, the center remains. See, bishop e3 would not have been a good idea. Knight takes e4, knight takes e4. Then d5 is coming. Now, after h3, if opponent plays rook e8, bishop g4 has been dealt with. Let's just try to develop the bishop. By the way, not to e3 because then this pawn would get weaker. Now, by the way, in this position, white is doing better because of strong center, stable center, active pieces. But then some of you will wait, there's no knight takes e4 here. No, it's a blunder because there is this very nice move, bishop takes d5. Let's see, punishing black for not completing their development. Knight f6 check, then white wins material. So yeah, so black doesn't have that knight takes e4 thing. And we have stabilized the center, and with active pieces, white has a better position. Alright, so please remember, whenever you have a certain type of positional advantage, you should try to maintain that as well. Sometimes your opponent might have some ideas to try to destabilize that advantage, to challenge that advantage of yours. So you need to be alert to keep that. Alright, let's go for the next position here. So this is white to play. Quite an interesting endgame. So there are certain things that I like about white's position. Rook and bishop combination. So one thing that you should remember is that in most cases, in most endgames, the combination of rook and bishop would work well than rook and knight because rook and bishop are both long range pieces. So the coordination between those pieces will be quite better in most endgames as compared to rook and knight. So because of that reason, I like white's position. Also, yes, if you want to attempt this position, please pause the video here and resume once you are ready with the move. So another thing I like about white's position is the rook on the 7th rank. Of course, it is keeping the king restricted. It is putting some pressure on the king side. And then if the rook moves, then there can be some ideas. So rook b7 type of thing. So definitely that rook is well placed there. Another thing, because of which I like white's position is this isolated pawn on e5. So that is a weakness, and then we might be able to do something about it. So how about opponent's ideas? There's one clear idea. It could create certain problems, because please remember that on the other side of the board, other flank actually, because there are three pawns on king side, one pawn on queen side. Now please remember, as a defender, black is clearly the one who is defending here. They would want to eliminate this b2 pawn. Why? Because then only on the one flank, only on the one side, the king side, the pawns would be left. So the defense becomes a lot more easier. For example, just imagine if there is a pawn on b2. Even if there is a pawn on b6, that's fine actually. But since there is a pawn on b2, there is always a possibility that maybe we can activate our king, maybe we can do something with our rook, and if we get this pawn, this will become a pass pawn. So opponent will have to maintain a balance between keeping an eye on the king side and keeping an eye on the queen side. But imagine if this pawn is gone, then let's just imagine this pawn is gone, this pawn is gone, then the fundamental change what would happen in the position is that black can shift entire attention of theirs on the king side, defending the king side, and that would make things easier. So please remember that in the endgame, if you are pushing for the win, then try to keep the pawns on both sides. So you can try to put pressure on both sides, and your opponent cannot just be like, okay, I'll just defend one particular side, because if they do, then you can just shift on the other side and then you can get the advantage. So there is no way we are going to give this pawn. So now, what should we do? Should we play king e3? See, king e3, there can be some issues with this. We don't want to give up a pawn just like that. It might be an interesting option, but then once again, I'm a bit hesitant, because do I really want to take that isolated pawn of black and give this pawn? So that is so something we should not be so casual about. There can be, by the way, certain ideas about rook d8 and then maybe rook d3, or if the king moves, then rook d2. So it looks, apart from knight g2, there can be some ideas for black as well. So I'm not a big fan of that. So another thing, bishop c4 seems like a really interesting move, improving the bishop's position a bit and then stopping this. But still, we have to remember that opponent is not just trying to play knight d3. Opponent has plans of rook d8 as well. Because what is this rook doing? It's not doing much. Black wants to get it on the open file. And maybe after bishop c4, there can be rook c8 option as well. If b3, then maybe opponent might want to complicate with b5 and then rook c2. So, see, there is this rook d8 idea, rook c8, b5 idea. So, it's clear that black is actually able to create some activity. So, we have to be careful in trying to stop that idea of black. It's not just about stopping knight d3, it's about stopping it in a proper manner. And the proper way to do here, to stop that idea, is rook d7. What's the plan? The plan was, not only we stop knight d3, we also stop rook d8 idea of the opponent. Now, but we'll be like, okay, but black got the rook on the open file. But we don't have to worry immediately, because these squares are covered. Of course, opponent wants to do that, but still we have time, so we can do something about it actually. It's not like opponent is attacking our bishop or something like that. So now, the knight is active, there is no threat. It's time to restrict that knight. And then what will happen is that we will be able to, once the knight gets restricted, we'll be able to put more pressure on black. So let's say in this position, if the knight goes to h3, you're not worried. This, knight's trapped. So black has to be careful. But of course, black is not going to give up the knight. Knight h5 will be played. Now what? It's time to put pressure on this pawn. Because yes, black's rook is on the open file, but no serious threats are there. And this knight is a bit restricted. The rook goes back, no issues at all. There was another weakness that we were talking about, the isolated pawn on e5. Rook e6, and then this weak. By the way, black still won't give up. Black wants to play rook d8. Let's try rook d2. See, we are not in a rush. This is under pressure. This is under pressure. Let's just deal with that opponent's idea. Let's just play king e3. This is covered. This is covered. This is covered. Then yeah, it's just, and now this is weak. This is weak. And it's clear that white is just completely dominating. So please remember that you should try to identify your opponent's ideas. That's very important. That's prophylactical thinking for us, prophylaxis. But as we saw in some of the examples, after we identify what our opponent wants to do, we should not just go for the first move that comes into our mind. Like this position. Not bishop c4, not king e3, not bishop c2, but rook d7. Like one of, this example. This is a threat. Don't just be in a rush and play a4. So the first step is trying to identify what your opponent wants to do, and second step is making a list of the moves that stops your opponent's idea. And once you make a list of the moves, then you should take a call which one you should go for. That would not just stop the opponent's idea, but would also minimize their activity, so we won't have to worry about some other thing later on, right? So I hope that with the examples that I discussed with you, you got more perspective about what prophylactic thinking is and how incorporating this in your thought process can help you in improving your game. So thank you very much for watching the video, and please provide your valuable feedback in the comments. Lastly, don't forget to check chessneurons.com, your go-to platform for improving your positional chess. I'll see you in the next video.